Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. This is your host, David Parra, and today we have a very, very good show again. As you know, we address very important issues, relevant issues, and we also celebrate Latino accomplishments, and we connect the community through education and events. And talking about events, I'm going to be making an announcement of a very special event. It's called a Lunch and Learn. Lunch and Learn. It's going to take place next week, June 12th in Tolleson. This is 2019. In case you watch this video in a year or two, this is happening June 12th, 2019. If you visit our web, or not web, but Facebook page at AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection, you will find a flyer. And then on that post, you find a link, and you can go ahead and register. You can call 480-414-7537. Sorry, 7536, 480-414-7637 if you would like to do it over the phone. The topic today is very, very important, and it probably will surprise you. The topic today is, it's the economy, stupid. Again, it's the economy, stupid. It's going to be very interesting. Stay with us. Invite your friends. Again, visit our page and share the show. This is also being broadcasted via Facebook Live, and the video obviously will remain on our Facebook page at AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Here we go. With me today is my colleague, Steve Jennings. He's been with us before. Steve Jennings is the AARP Arizona Associate State Director for Advocacy. Here's this word again, advocacy. So first of all, Steve, thank you so much for joining our show today.
Great to be here, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you're beginning to enjoy these shows. I don't know how much radio you've done in the past, Steve, but I kind of see that you like them.
It's always a pleasure to work with you, David.
Thank you. So we have 7 minutes for this first segment, Steve, and I'm going to, let me just make sure that the audio and the video seems like it's going well. Let's explain this concept of it's the economy, stupid. And it's interesting, yesterday I went to Sierra Vista, and I gave a talk to about 200 people on Social Security and Medicare. And I actually asked the audience if anybody could help me or had heard this phrase, it's the economy, stupid. I love this phrase, by the way. I think it says a lot. And guess what, Steve? Not even one person knew about it. So I'm going to ask you to explain. And by the way, let me read something that I got from the internet first, okay? And then I'll ask you. It's the economy, stupid is a slight variation of the phrase the economy, stupid, which James Carville coined as a campaign strategist of Bill Clinton's successful 1992 presidential campaign against sitting President George H.W. Bush. I'm sure you've heard this before, Steve. What does that evoke? What does that mean to you? And basically, how does the country, those that are familiar with this phrase, take it?
Well, Carville was known as the Ragin' Cajun. That's because he's from Louisiana, and when you listen to him talk, he has this accent of being from that part of the country. But, that was a successful campaign slogan. Bill Clinton got elected, and, what it means is it's, is your family going to survive? Is the economy going to have jobs, and you and your children and your grandchildren in the future will be able to grow and make money and have families and have things be all right? That's really what, most American voters vote on the basis of what's good for families. They don't think in terms of cities or states
Right.
or nations so much. What will happen to my family? So, and that's very tied in with the economy and your ability to have a job and get a promotion and make more money and save money and pay your bills and, help your kids out, right?
So this is the phrase was coined by James Carville, a campaign strategist. So does this mean that they basically are saying, look, if you're going to win, you're going to have to address issues that touch money, basically, where the nitty gritty is. And you and I were talking, Stephen. I thought it was a great, great concept. Would you relate to our audience this concept of what are good laws if they are not funded?
Well,
right?
what you and I were talking about was this whole saying that we have when we work in the federal Congress or the state legislatures, and the saying is that you can pass all the laws you want to, but the meat of the legislature is the budget.
The meat of the legislature is the budget.
Be that the federal budget or the state budget or the county budget or the city budget, because the budget is the money that implements the laws, that get them to work and to enforce them. If they're to catch people committing crimes, or if they're to start programs that address public problems. The guys that pick up your garbage have to be paid, and that's in the budget.
Right.
And the police that protect you, that they've got to be paid too.
So, Steve, when was the last time in the short past when the U.S. balanced its budget? Because it's all about balancing our budgets. The U.S. As a country has to balance the budget. The states, at least we aspire, and even as you said, as a family, we all want to live within our means and balance budget. When was the last time that the United States balanced its budget?
Well, it's under Clinton when he was president back in the 90s, I think. And, that's actually a rare thing that the government has balanced its budget. It's, much like families, governments borrow money to address problems and to make investments. If the government invests in education or infrastructure, roads and highways and railroads and bridges and that sort of thing, or education, those are, infrastructure, education are all good investments for the government to make, because the economy will grow, generate more taxes for the government to invest, and they'll be able to pay people more money. So balanced budget is actually a political term that some interests use. And, of course, just like a family, we would all like to have more money coming in than we're spending, so that we're in the black and not in the red, so to speak.
Right.
It's a nice concept, but borrowing isn't necessarily bad if it's done responsibly.
Is it in the law? Is it in the Constitution or the laws of the United States that they have to balance the budget?
No, it is not. The states have to balance their budgets.
Okay.
But the
By law?
the federal government prints money. So no, it does not. Yeah, the states have to by law.
Are you saying across the board, all the states?
All the states, yeah.
And but isn't it? I thought I heard that they wanted to make that a law so that they, are forced basically to balance every year the budget.
Well, it's complicated, David. But in the recession that we went through in 2008 and stuff, I don't know if you noticed, but at one point the state, they like to say, we sold the Capitol, the buildings and of the state Capitol, and in an effort not to have to cut education any further than they did, and they cut education in major ways. They had to. In the 2008 recession, the state government's funds went down about 1/3. So of course they had to cut what they were spending on, and they could mortgage things and issue bonds and do different things to make fewer cuts, which they did. And now we've recovered. In fact, this last state legislature, for the first time since the recession, we had a budget surplus of about a little over $1 billion.
This is this past legislature here in Arizona?
Yeah, we have at this point, about a $10 billion state budget. And this year we had a $1 billion surplus. So there was a lot to argue over and fight over.
Right. We have to go on our first break. Stay with us. You are listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, it's the economy, stupid. We will be right back. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. I'm your host, David Parra. And again, I wanted to remind you that we do have a Lunch and Learn coming up this Wednesday, June the 12th in Tolleson. Mayor Ana Tovar is going to be the speaker, and we will be serving, obviously, a free lunch. It's going to be tacos de carne asada. I'm sure you like them. If you would like to attend, visit our page, AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection on Facebook. There will be a flyer there. Find it, and then there's a link and register. If you prefer to register by phone, give me a call after the show at 480-414-7637, 480-414-7637. Thanks. We hope you can join us. And by the way, do follow our page and help us reach more people by sharing the page and the shows. My guest today is Steve Jennings. He is the Associate State Director for Advocacy for AARP in Arizona. Steve and I obviously both of us work for AARP, and we love it. Steve basically deals with advocacy, what has to do with legislation, and AARP is heavily involved in the legislative process, advocating both at the federal level and the state level. We do have staff and volunteers, many of them involved in the process. So let's come back to our topic, Steve, and the topic is, it's the economy, stupid. So basically what we're trying to highlight is that laws can be passed, but if they're not funded, then what? And let's take just a little bit more here, and then we'll review a little bit of the three branches of government, if you don't mind, Steve. But so does this mean that even when somebody plans to perhaps pass a law, they first have to look into whether it's feasible to do it by looking at the budget? Let's take the example of the infrastructure, right? I think both parties agree that there is a need for a bill that would take care of the infrastructure, the bridges, the roads, and all that. So are you saying that since the budget is so critical, that they have to look at the budget to kind of time when it's the best time to even try to pass those kinds of laws?
Well, I think you're speaking of the federal infrastructure bill, and the federal government borrows money. They don't so much look at how the economy's doing at the moment, although politicians have to because voters elect them, and it's important to voters. But actually, the way the federal politicians have been talking about the infrastructure bill is also an employment bill that could, big federal spending on things like roads and bridges and canals and railroads will provide a lot of employment, and a lot of people will do better, and their families will do better, and they'll pay more taxes, and it is kind of a big cycle. But they're gauging, the discussion is over how much to spend. And unfortunately, the other part of the discussion is who's going to get credit and look good for passing this. And
that is another big consideration.
It's a very complicated one because, what projects get done in Maine, what projects get done in Texas, and the different political power of the politicians from these various areas. And so in the background, there's a discussion going on where consensus builds. This happens on almost all legislation. You've got to get consensus because they're going to vote on it. Consensus means agreement. And when you get enough agreement that, 50% plus one, then you can pass something.
Yeah. Wow. Pretty complicated. Now, is there a scenario, Steve, where even when there is already a law that has passed, and if we are short of money, is there discretion that maybe the president of the United States can say, you know what, we wanted to devote this money for this project, but I am forced to do something different, so I'm going to move the funding around, and therefore we're not going to continue to fund this aspect of such project, for example.
That happens all the time, and we're counting on our politicians, our elected people, to make good decisions. But I was in a discussion yesterday, which was a good example of that, and I was in a city discussion here in Phoenix, and it was about graffiti. And the man was saying that at one point they had 7 policemen working on graffiti, and the elimination of it and catching the people that do it the most. And the effort had been cut back so much that there was very few people from the police department, that other organizations were working to eliminate the graffiti and to capture the people doing it. But it was one of those classic cases where the money had been moved elsewhere. They thought there were other things more important.
Wow.
And maybe there were.
So one thing is to pass a law, then you fund you fund it, but then in
Or
the
you
process,
make sure that you can fund it before you pass it,
Right.
right? That the money's there.
So let's repeat again, because I think this is so critical. Many times we are so focused on passing laws, and we should, but we are saying today it's the economy, stupid. In other words, where's the money? Where's the beef? What did you say about the
That's
budget
I say
being?
you can we always like to recite to each other when we're at the legislature. You can pass all the laws you want to, but the meat of the legislature is the state budget.
The
That's
meat.
what you really fight over.
So we can't say where's the beef, but we can say where's the meat.
Right.
So where's the budget? So it's like a family, right? A family may have plans and vacation, and all of a sudden you face a hurdle on the way. So now you're going to have to decide whether to borrow money to carry out that trip, that vacation, or not go. So same kind of thing happens with government.
Right, and there's competing interests, and everybody likes to say, "Oh, what a mess the legislature is," or "What a mess the Congress is," but it's kind of set up to be that way, and these are complicated things. One of the the big fight in Arizona legislature has been over education, right? And the educators have been saying that to get back to where they were in 2008, it would cost around $1 billion
Wow.
to completely fund it, which was the size of the surplus this time. But the governor wanted some of the surplus for the rainy day fund in case we had another recession, that there would be some money to spend on necessary things when the tax revenues fell off in a recession. Other people wanted money for other things. We wanted some money for programs for older people. And there was eventually consensus built over the Memorial Day weekend, and the budget bill was passed, which included a lot of things. And there was a lot of bills that were waiting for funding before they would pass them. And once they had achieved consensus on the budget, they then passed several bills that had.
Yeah. So in the end, what we're trying to say is that at the same time that we are paying attention to bills becoming laws and advocating, we have to be mindful of budget, right? Because a law may be great, but where's the meat?
And
right?
the legislature, the Arizona legislature has an office of the budget, and it periodically reports to the legislature what the tax revenues coming in are throughout the year, so they can make a good estimate over how much money they'll have, to fight over come January when the legislature meets.
I have heard about the Appropriations Committee. Is this a general committee, or there are several committees depending on or by committee? Can you explain the concept of the Appropriations Committee?
The work of the legislature is done in committees.
Right.
And when you go there and sit up in the gallery and look down at the Senate or look down at the House of Representatives, they're voting on things that have gone through committees. There were 1,300 bills this last legislature.
1,300?
And yet, there's very few that pass. Most bills die in committee. The committees are there to sort them out. And the two most powerful committees of the legislature are the Senate Appropriations Committee and the House Appropriations.
Oh, so each of the houses have an Appropriations Committee, which is, the verb would be to appropriate, right? In other words, to get the money to fund the laws that are passed. Is this correct?
Yeah, well, they not just get the money because the money's coming in from taxes, right?
Right.
But they decide if it's a wise idea to spend $1 million on this or $2 million on that. All the bills that have a price tag have to make it through the appropriations committees.
Now, these Senate and House appropriations committees, do they apply both at the federal level in Washington and then in each state?
Well, there are similar things. Yeah, the different state legislatures have minor variations in how they operate. Some state legislatures only meet every 2 years rather than every year, like Arizona's does. Arizona has a constitutional limit of 100 days it's supposed to operate, although this year it went for 132 days.
Yeah.
And it's mirrored in the federal.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you to explain, Steve, is the legislative sessions. Not every state, the session of each state varies, right? Some may be months, 2 months, 3 months. Can you explain that concept?
Well, some states, big states like California or New York, they have legislatures that run all year.
All year
They're
long.
just almost like the federal legislature.
Okay.
In fact, I was in Pennsylvania, and the state capitol in Pennsylvania is nearly as large as the federal capitol
Wow.
in Washington, D.C. So, and other state legislatures are much shorter duration. They all tend to meet during the winter. Why do you think they meet during the winter, W?
So that people are out of there?
Yeah. You know, back when we were an agricultural nation, and it would be the farmers who were the legislators. Well, that's
Right.
when they could leave their farms and stay.
So
in the
basically,
state
you're
capital.
saying that they prefer to legislate when people are not there to not be bothered, Steve? Is that what you're trying to?
Yeah. Well,
It's.
you
I
know,
mean, it could be a reality.
yeah.
And it's not that you're making it up, but is that happening?
We're less an agricultural nation than we used to be, but we still move on some of those rhythms.
Right,
So
right.
State legislatures tend to convene about the second week in January, and then last various lengths.
How about Arizona's legislature? What is the session? How long is it?
It goes from the second week in January for about 100 days.
100 days.
Yeah, and it usually concludes end of April, May, somewhere in there. Although it can run longer. It's run into July at one point.
So that's how long the legislators
state legislature.
stayed there in Arizona to work. Once it's over, then they go on with their lives.
Well, there's some committees, they're called interim committees, that meet and prepare legislation for the next session or review laws that have passed.
But
or
not
they
all
want to
the
be
legislators. Not all the legislators do that. Only
No,
some.
not all. Only
Okay.
some, yeah. And another thing they're doing, David, is they enact laws just for a certain period. One of the laws that we got through for the elderly was going to be rescinded on July 1 of 2023. And what that really means is the legislators in power at that time will take a look at it and decide if it's a program worth continuing.
Yeah. Just off the top of your head, Steve, here in Arizona, what are big items that are always being considered that generate anxiety when it comes to budget? I'm sure education is one of them.
Yeah, they're the same in a lot of the state legislatures as they are in the federal government. You know, there's the cost of the state government and the retirement for the state employees. Education is another big one, and public safety is another big one, right?
So making sure that we have money for what? For policing or
to fund all the, you know, not only the police and the state highway patrol, but for the attorney general. That's part of the law enforcement community. There's a lot of, you know, different parts of that. The National Guard is part of it, and you know, the state government is a big thing. We've got a $10 billion. Well, this year it's going to be over an $11
billion budget in Arizona.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a big state.
Yeah.
It's a big budget.
Thank you, Steve. Stay with us. We will take our second break. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, it's the economy, stupid. We will be right back. Thank you. Thank you so much for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, it's the economy, stupid. And again, this is not, you know, it's interesting. Stupid in Spanish is not necessarily as strong as if you were to say that in Spanish. I mean, in English. In English, it's not as strong as if you were to say that same word in Spanish.
It's more of an insult in
Oh,
Spanish?
in Spanish? Well, to me, it's more like tonto as opposed to estúpido. If you say estúpido, then it's really, really strong. But if you say tonto, it's much less. But in English, stupid is not necessarily an offensive word necessarily.
That's
but
right.
But again, just if you just join us, this is a phrase that was coined by James Carville, campaign strategist of Bill Clinton's successful 1992 presidential campaign. So and this basically highlights the importance of funding, the importance of the economy, the importance of having money to carry out and implement laws that are passed.
Yeah,
because you just said, Steve, say it again because I think it's so good
Well,
about
I think
the meat.
Really what Carville was doing was he was saying that the economy wasn't doing so well at that time, and the way that Clinton should campaign was to say what he would do to make the economy better so that more people would have jobs and better jobs and the unemployment would go down, and that's why they called it "It's the Economy, Stupid," and that if you didn't get that, you really were sort of stupid.
Got it. Someone's like, oh, what should I run on, right? I have to run
That's
on
right.
something. Well, it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah. And it
le-
worked.
Yeah, because he won. Bill
Yeah.
Clinton ended up winning that campaign. Steve, I just wanted to ask you if you and I can just review for our audience just a few concepts that are basic to our democracy here in America. In America, we are a democracy, and we have three branches of governments. We have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and we have the judicial. And in the executive branch, obviously, what is the executive composed of, Steve? The executive branch.
Well, in each, the executive executes the laws. They're supposed to make the laws work that the legislative pass. And in the federal government in Washington, D.C., you have the President of the United States. And the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch, and everyone that works in the executive branch works for the President. Just like here in the state of Arizona, we have the governor. And everybody, that works in state government, except the people that work in the courts or the people that work for the legislature, all the rest of them work for the governor. And in the city, you have the mayor, right? You have the President of the United States. You have the governor of the state.
Right.
And in the city, you have the mayor, and all the city employers work for the mayor. That's the executive branch.
Right. Now, in the federal, obviously, we have the cabinet, right? So what is the cabinet of the president primarily?
Yeah, and the cabinet is the heads of all the different divisions of the government, the different departments of the government, the Department of Defense, the Department of Health and Human Services, the environmental people, the AV, so that the cabinet members are the heads of those divisions, and they have to be get consent from the U.S. Senate to serve on the cabinet. So when a new president comes in, the people he appoints to advise him and to head up these different parts of the government have to go before the Senate and answer questions, and it's a good process. It's a public process.
So the cabinet is composed of secretaries. So now a secretary is also a department, and a secretary is also the person who heads that secretary,
That's right.
correct? Secretary of Defense, for example.
That's right.
So when we talk about the secretary, we could be meaning the person or the department. And these, I have a note here that their role is to advise the president on any subject he may require relating to the duties of each member's respective office. Now, I understand, Steve, and I believe that I have a note here that in addition to those secretaries, which is Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Labor, State, Transportation, Treasury and Veterans Affairs, and the Attorney General. Even the Attorney General is under the president, of course. And you said that the president, what's the word that you use when it has to be approved by the Senate? He first makes the, what?
Well, I think in terms of the secretaries for the cabinet, they don't require a vote approval.
Okay.
But they go before the Senate for consent,
Got it.
I think is the word.
Okay.
And that just means that there's not a major objection. And I think you saw recently where the Senate, where the president floated some names for different positions, and it was made known to him that they would have trouble in the Senate, and so they were sort of dropped from consideration,
Right.
without going through this process.
So even they knew before that they would not like him, so to speak.
Yeah, and that kind of happens in the press if you
Right.
watch it. I think it was actually more for the Federal Reserve, which is a whole different
Right.
entity than we're talking about.
Now, I also have a note here that says that additionally, the cabinet includes the White House Chief of Staff and the heads of the environmental Protection Agency, Office of Management and Budget, United States Trade Representative, Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and Small Business Administration. So this is the executive branch. Now, when we move to the legislative branch, and again, this is the separation of powers, right? So these three have to work together, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. What is the legislative branch composed of?
Well, the legislative branch is the two chambers federally and in the states, the Senate and the House. And, we have major political parties that tend to control these. And that, after elections, the two main parties meet in private, and they elect their officers. And the party that wins the election with the most votes, like if you're in the Senate, if you have more than half of the senators, then, the person that wins your internal election becomes the president of the Senate. That's Mitch McConnell.
So you have the
right
president in the Senate, and then in the House you would have the speaker of the House,
right.
president of the Senate, and then you have the minority leaders, correct?
Yeah, well, they sort of, they meet separately once the election happens. The Republicans meet in one room and the Democrats meet in another, and they sort of have a fight in there of who in their party is going to run things in the chamber, because if they're the majority party,
Right.
they have the majority, they're going to control the chamber. And whoever wins that fight, so to speak, and it may be gentlemanly, it may be less so, becomes the president of the Senate, and he or she will appoint their supporters as the heads of the different committees. See?
Yeah, now, Steve, so we have 2 senators per state, totaling 100, correct? And this has nothing to do with the population. Every state gets 2 senators.
That's right.
Can you relate about the 6-year terms and then the staggering? Because that, I think, is an important concept to understand.
Yeah, and that's that, the framers of the Constitution thought that the Senate should be the more gentlemanly and more removed chamber.
Interesting.
In fact, the House, where they're elected every 2 years, there have actually been fistfights on the floor of the House. And a while back, one representative beat another representative with their cane.
Interesting.
But the Senate, and so you give them longer terms. In the Constitution, they gave them 6-year terms, so they would be more removed from the day-to-day political passions and persuasions and fights, and be leveler heads, so to speak.
So you have 6-year terms for senators.
And so you have a third of them elected every 2 years.
So they stagger them. So
staggered.
every 2 years, some senators will have to either run for re-election, and then others will have a chance to...
Will still be in for another 4 years.
Got
or
it.
2 years before they have to run. Yeah.
And how about the House?
Well, the House is 2 years.
And I have here that it's 435 representatives.
That's right.
And now what I understand, and the difference here, Steve, and you can add to it, is that senators... we only get 2, or each state gets 2 senators, but then the representatives, that's dependent on the population, correct?
That's right. And so the argument is that the House is more representative than the Senate is, in the sense that a state like Wyoming that has around 500,000 people has 2 senators in the U.S., but California, with 33 million people, has 2 senators also. So there's there's always an ongoing debate: is the Senate fair, and maybe the House, since it's based on population, is more fair.
Got it. Now, and so let's try to tie in this concept of the representatives from the House, Steve, to the census. So I understand that the census can play an important part in the layout and the numbers and the distribution of representatives in the country. Is that so?
Well, that's a very important point that you're getting on, and that is that, the number of districts you have in the state are dependent upon the census count, which is done every 10 years. And then, there's reapportionment, meaning that the districts, the state legislatures, can change the districts, or if they've set up another body to do that. And you get into the whole idea of gerrymandering, or the party that's in power in a state legislature setting up the districts in a way that favors them. And there's always the party out of power is always talking about how the districts were gerrymandered to keep them so.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an ongoing thing, and there's some truth to it, because in some of the states, certain parties stay in power that may not be as representative of the actual political alignment of the voters. But,
right.
That's what you're getting at. And so the census, and participating in the census and reporting, and answering the questions is very important, because it will determine, the power in the state.
Right. So not only the census will determine how much money is allocated to the states, but it also determines whether states will lose seats or gain seats in the House of Representatives, correct?
That's right.
Now,
and that's kind of happening in Arizona, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're one of the fastest growing states,
right?
And we've recently gone from 8 to 9 House districts, and it may not be long before there's another one.
When you say
growing.
When we say that we did that, did that happen in 2010? In the 2010 census?
It's happened on the basis of the census. That's right.
Got it. Let's just, we have just 1 minute. The judicial branch, we know we have 9 Supreme justices, right?
That's
right. But there are also lower courts, so the lower courts, the district courts, and the Supreme Court all form the judicial branch of government. So let me just ask you a question. Before we go on our last break. So we call them Supreme Justices, correct?
Supreme Court Justices.
Supreme Court Justices. That's right. Now, are they elected?
No, they're appointed, and with advised consent of the Senate, and they're lifetime terms. They're appointed for life.
So there's a nomination, and then a confirmation, and then an appointment.
Well, an appointment to be confirmed by the Senate. And, again, the framers of the Constitution were trying to make them so removed from the day-to-day passions that they could rule dispassionately based on the law. That was the idea.
And to make sure that
it's a nation of laws and not of men.
And the judicial branch has to make sure that the Constitution is observed and not violated, right?
That's one of their functions.
One of their functions.
And to interpret the Constitution.
To interpret. And
how it fits the current situation.
It's supposed to be nonpartisan, the Supreme Court justices, correct?
Hopefully.
But typically the president obviously appoints the ones that, they probably, even though they're not supposed to, but it tends to bring this kind of a situation. We always see it,
There's a lot of arguments over the Supreme Court that
definitely.
are ongoing, but by and large, the Supreme Court has been the most conservative of the 3 branches of government. The founders, do I have time? The founders try and made the 3 branches of government co-equal. The idea being that one branch wouldn't get so much power that only it would run things.
Right.
And that's part of the American experiment and the American experience.
You call it experiment, and sure it is. Stay with us. We're going to take our last break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, it's the economy, stupid. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you so much for staying with us. One more time, let me let you know that we are having a lunch and learn where the mayor of Tolleson, Ana Tovar, is going to be the main speaker. Join us. We're going to serve a free lunch. It's going to be June 12th, 2019. June 12th, 2019. Visit our page, Facebook page, AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. You'll find a flyer there. There's a link that you can use to register. We still have a good 20 to 30 spaces open. We are going to have about 100, 120 people join. So please do register if you would like to attend. We want to just focus now in Arizona. And again, the subject today is it's the economy, stupid, and basically highlighting that laws are obviously critical, but the money, funding, having enough funding to implement laws are just as important.
And enforce the laws.
And to enforce the
Yeah,
laws.
that's right.
That is
Yes.
so critical. And this really, I mean, I honestly love this phrase. I love it. I know Len Kirshner uses it a lot. Len Kirshner is a former director of Access, and he's been as a volunteer with AARP forever. He has been a great asset to AARP, and he uses it quite a
Access
bit.
is really about money because you're paying for
There
medical
you go.
care. In fact, the Access budget is mostly paid for by the federal government here in the state of Arizona, and its budget is actually larger than the state budget. Are you aware of that, David? That Access's budget is $12 billion, and the state budget is $11 billion. It doesn't go through the state. It has
That
to be
is-
approved by the state.
That is
but
interesting.
that's how
Obviously,
expensive medical care is, and there's 1.9 million Arizonans are on Access. Out of
1.9?
about 7 million.
so we're nearing 2 million people are
on
in
Access.
on
yeah,
Access.
there's a lot of people in Arizona that are having a tough time of things and are eligible for Access.
So let me bring this point again. You're saying that the Access program has a larger budget than the actual budget of the whole state. So
That's
how does it
correct.
work? Is that because the federal does match? I mean,
The federal
helps.
matches, and it's not limited. It's an entitlement. So if you're poor enough to be eligible, then the federal government comes up with the money to fund that.
Now, since we are on Access, Steve, this is again June of 2019. Just in case somebody will listen or watch this video in a year or two, but can you tell us a little bit about what Access is trying to do in setting up? Making some restrictions come 2020. Remember those restrictions about job? They have to look for work or be working or something to that effect.
Yeah, and it's a relatively small number of people from the
Okay.
whole program. I was mentioning there's about 101.9 million people on Access, and this applies to around 200,000 of those people. And it's, if you're an adult between 18 and 60, you will need to be able to verify that if you're not one of the groups that's excluded, like people with disabilities
Right.
or illness prevents them, that you have looked for work, or you're in training, or you're serving in a volunteer capacity with certain organizations, or you're taking education. You'll need to be able to certify that on an annual basis, and it isn't clear what the type of certification will be, how you will prove it, how often it will be required. That isn't published yet, exactly what that will be. And in other states that have done that, a large number of people have lost their eligibility for the program. And
Wow.
whether people are mentally able to do it, or they're physically able to ride a bus and report on time, how difficult the state makes to do that.
Wow.
There are efforts to make it as easy as possible here in the state of Arizona, but we've yet to see exactly what that will look like, the proposal.
Right.
And it's to begin January 1 of 2020.
So again, January 1, 2020, Access will start implementing work
For some of
requirements
the people on the program.
for some. I will have someone from the Access program on August 1st. August 1st, mark your calendars. We're going to have someone from the Access program to join our show, and I will be asking all those questions.
Yeah, and it's very important.
Yes. So, Steve, going back to the state, before we hit or we address something that is very dear to AARP's heart, caregiving, and I know education is not an area that AARP advocates for necessarily, but what was your impression about the education issue, just very, very briefly, that happened in
Well,
the
I mean,
budget?
older Arizonans love their children and they love their grandchildren, and education is very important because if the young people are well educated, they can get good jobs and pay lots of Social Security taxes
Right.
and help keep Social Security healthy. So education, the teachers got part of the raise they were promised in the last legislature. That was in question. There was some more money put into education that was necessary. It was not everything people wanted, but that fight will go on in the future.
It's very difficult, I assume, for those that are advocating to understand that there has to be negotiations, right? There has to be that back and forth because you can't have everything, right?
Right. And I think everybody up there realizes that. But, at the same time, when for the first time in many years you have a significant surplus, but, some people up there say, well, we should take over half of it and put it away in a rainy day fund.
Okay.
And there's some sense to that.
Right.
Because we saw what happened in 2008 where
Right.
the economy dropped off by a third and what had to happen. So what was the right balance? How much to put away? How much to spend on programs? Everybody had a different idea and was really, frankly, was sort of yelling at each of the legislators from a different direction.
So again, we are now focusing on the Arizona state budget. Are you saying, Steve, that from 2008, this past 2 years is where we have actually seen a surplus? Would you say the last 2 years?
This year we had $1 billion to argue over.
$1 billion surplus, which is
that's
really
right,
good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now let's come to this matter of caregiving, and I know that you are the advocacy director, and you are aware of efforts at the federal level and efforts at the state level that AARP was very, very directly involved in advocating. Can you relate to us first the federal and where that stands now, and then at the state level?
The main federal thing that happened was
Right.
there was an establishment of a committee of stakeholders that are going to look at how the federal government can assist family caregivers to make their lives easier and to make their work more effective. Families taking care of their own mean that older people can stay in their own homes and stay out of expensive taxpayer-supported institutions like nursing homes. Nursing homes now are so expensive, it doesn't take you long to go broke, and then you have to be on ALTEX here in Arizona. That's, access long-term care.
Right.
And so the longer families can take care of their own relatives, the better. And so we also were asking for a reimbursement program from the state this year. It was Senate Bill 1172 that we found that family caregivers a lot of them spend 20% of their own income on the people they're caring for, out-of-pocket expenses.
And this is why, because some of the care involved with caregiving is not covered basically by insurance, right?
Right. It's not covered.
So they have to use their own money to pay for those services.
Well, if you have to go to work and you need some workers to come in and help grandma have lunch or, get dressed in the morning or whatever, you may be taking care of your children at the same time. That's called the sandwich generation, where you're running grandma to medical appointments. You leave your job and you pay for the gas. And, it's funny. It ends up being around $7,000 a year people spend. That's over $100 a week.
So what did the AARP's effort, the bill, I would suppose it was a bill?
The bill was for unusual expenses. If you need to put grab bars in the shower,
okay.
If you need to get a walk-in tub that people can get in because they can't step over safely, if you need to put a ramp on the home or a lift in the car, every 3 years you could apply for up to $1,000 in reimbursement from the state that you could prove, you had made those expenses out of your own pocket per person you're taking care of.
So this is going to be in the.
And you're only eligible for 1/2 of the money you spend, up to $1,000.
So up to $1,000. So you would get
taking care of an adult.
You would get 500
family member.
or the full
No, you
1,000.
would get 1,000 if you spent 2,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and on an adult to keep them out of an institution. Yeah, and the Department of Aging is going to study how many people that we're keeping out of institutions to save the taxpayers' money and report that back to the legislature.
And practically speaking, how is the person going to be able to so-called claim that credit?
Well, you would have receipts.
On the tax, when you file taxes?
No, you would just have the receipts
Okay.
and you'd make application, and
Okay.
the Department of Aging could look at your receipts or have you submit them. And
So this has nothing to do with the federal. It's a state.
It's state.
Department of Aging will have a mechanism where the people will be able to apply.
That's right. And my understanding is there's only 3 other states that have ever done anything like that. So Arizona's being a leader right now, and right now I'm getting emails from other people in AARP saying our state would like to do that. Can you show me what your law is like?
Just in a few seconds, what was this the passage of this bill like for you as as the director of advocacy and the volunteers that work for you, not for you, but with you?
Well,
what was it like to win that to have this bill become a law?
it was great, and we all love it. But the thing that happened, David, it goes right back to it's the economy, stupid. It didn't pass until the final hours of the legislature where they decided
Wow.
they had money for it.
So it was ready to pass, but it was not until there was
They held
money
to
for
the
it.
last
Then
minute, and then they said we'll include it in the budget, and we all let out a big sigh of relief, and that was over the Memorial Day weekend.
that is a great
very
example.
dramatic.
A great example of what we address in this show today. It's the economy, stupid. So yes, laws critical, no doubt. But where's the meat? Where's the money? Right?
That's right.
Thank you so much, Steve, for joining our show today. It was great having you, and we touched a lot of subjects, and I really enjoyed it. And we'll invite
show,
you.
David. Thanks
we'll
for having us.
We'll invite you to come back soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for listening and joining our show today. This is all the time we have for now. This was AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. See you next time. Have a great day.